The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Windsor Castle, as Sergeant James Mitchell adjusted his red tunic and checked his bearskin hat one final time. At 42 years old, he had served as a member of the Queen's Guard for nearly 2 decades, standing motionless for hours in all weather conditions. His weathered hands, scarred from years of military service before joining the royal household, gripped his rifle with practiced ease. James had seen it all during his years of service. Tourists who tried to make him laugh, children who stared in wonder, and countless dignitaries who passed by without a second glance. But today felt different somehow. The castle buzzed with a subtle energy that suggested the royal family was in residence, though as a guard, James rarely had direct contact with them. His personal life had been crumbling for months. His wife Sarah had left him 6 weeks ago, taking their 8-year-old daughter Emma with her. The divorce papers sat unsigned on his kitchen table, a constant reminder of his failures as a husband and father. Sarah had grown tired of his long absences, his rigid military discipline that spilled over into home life, and his inability to express emotions after years of conditioning to remain stoic and unmovable. The financial strain was overwhelming. His modest guard salary barely covered the rent on his small London flat, let alone the child support payments that would soon be required. He had been considering leaving the Guard entirely, perhaps finding work in private security where the pay was better, even though it would mean abandoning a career he had dedicated his life to. As James took his position outside the state apartments, his mind wandered to Emma. She used to visit him at work occasionally, her eyes wide with pride as she watched her father stand guard. She would whisper that he looked like a toy soldier come to life, and he would fight back smiles behind his stoic expression. Those visits had stopped when the arguments at home grew louder and more frequent. The morning stretched on as James maintained his rigid posture, his trained eyes scanning the area, while his mind battled the familiar demons of self-doubt and regret. He had always prided himself on his ability to compartmentalize, to separate his personal struggles from his professional duties, but lately, the walls between the two were beginning to crumble. A group of staff members hurried past, whispering about preparations for an upcoming event. James caught fragments of their conversation about the young princes and their schedules. He had glimpsed Prince George from a distance on several occasions during state functions, but had never been in close proximity to the boy. The royal children were typically well shielded from the working staff, protected by layers of security and protocol. As the clock tower chimed 11, James noticed a small commotion near the garden entrance. Several protection officers were positioning themselves discreetly, which usually meant a member of the royal family was about to make an appearance. He straightened his already perfect posture and focused his gaze forward, prepared for whatever the day might bring, unaware that his life was about to change in ways he could never imagine. Prince George emerged from the garden path with his nanny Charlotte, walking beside him at a leisurely pace. At 10 years old, the future king carried himself with the natural confidence of his heritage, yet there remained something refreshingly ordinary about his curiosity and energy. His school uniform was slightly rumpled from morning lessons, and his hair showed signs of an active outdoor break. As they approached the area where James stood guard, Charlotte was engaged in conversation with another staff member about the afternoon's schedule. Prince George, however, had become distracted by something entirely different. His sharp eyes had noticed what others had missed. James was trembling ever so slightly, and a single tear had escaped down his cheek despite his rigid military bearing. The young prince slowed his steps, studying the guard with the intense focus that adults often underestimated in children. While James maintained his forward gaze and motionless stance as protocol demanded, Prince George could see the pain etched in the man's expression. There was something deeply human and vulnerable about this soldier who stood so straight and proud, yet was clearly struggling with invisible burdens. Prince George had been raised with an acute awareness of duty and service. His parents had taught him that with privilege came responsibility, and that leadership meant recognizing when others were in need. Though he was young, he had already shown remarkable empathy in situations that would have been overlooked by many adults. Without drawing attention to his actions, Prince George quietly reached into his school bag and pulled out a small hand-drawn card. It was something he had created during art class that morning, a simple sketch of a soldier standing proudly with the words, "Thank you for keeping us safe," written in his careful handwriting. He had originally planned to give it to his father to pass along to the military personnel at the castle, but something about this moment felt more important. Charlotte continued her conversation, unaware that her young charge had stopped walking. The other staff members were focused on their duties, and the protection officers maintained their professional distance. In this bubble of routine castle life, Prince George found himself uniquely positioned to act on his instincts without the weight of royal protocol interfering. The boy approached James slowly, careful not to startle him. James caught sight of the movement in his peripheral vision but remained at attention, unsure of what was happening. Prince George stopped directly in front of the guard and held up the small card so that James could see it clearly. For a moment, their eyes met, the future king and the struggling soldier, and something profound passed between them. Prince George's expression was serious and knowing, far beyond his years. He seemed to understand that this wasn't a moment for words or grand gestures, but rather for simple human recognition. James felt his breath catch in his throat as he read the boy's handwritten message. The kindness in Prince George's eyes, the genuine concern radiating from such a young person, touched something deep inside him that had been hardened by months of personal struggle and years of military conditioning. Prince George carefully placed the card at James's feet, positioning it so that the guard could continue to see the message throughout his shift. Then, with the quiet dignity that seemed to come naturally to him, the young prince stepped back and gave James a small, respectful nod before rejoining his nanny. The entire interaction had lasted less than 2 minutes, conducted without a single word spoken, yet it carried more weight than hours of conversation could have achieved. James stood frozen in place, his training warring with the overwhelming emotions that Prince George's simple gesture had unleashed. The small card at his feet seemed to glow with significance, its childish handwriting and innocent drawing representing something far greater than its humble materials. For the first time in months, James felt truly seen, not as a ceremonial figure or a failed husband, but as a human being worthy of gratitude and respect. The remainder of his shift passed in a blur of reflection and revelation. James found himself thinking about the moments in his life when small acts of kindness had made profound differences. His grandmother's gentle words when he was a frightened recruit, a fellow soldier's silent support during his darkest deployment, his daughter's proud smile when he taught her to ride a bicycle. Somehow, Prince George's wordless acknowledgement connected all these memories into a tapestry of human compassion that James had forgotten existed. When his replacement arrived at the end of the shift, James carefully picked up the card, handling it as if it were made of precious metal. The other guard raised an eyebrow at this break in protocol, but James offered no explanation. Some experiences were too sacred to translate into casual conversation. That evening, James sat in his empty flat staring at the card propped against his kitchen table, next to the unsigned divorce papers that had haunted him for weeks. The contrast was stark. One document representing the end of his marriage and his perceived failures, the other representing hope and recognition of his worth. For the first time since Sarah had left, James allowed himself to truly grieve the loss of his family, while also acknowledging that his pain did not define his entire existence. He picked up his phone and scrolled to Emma's number, hesitating before pressing call. When his daughter's voice answered, bright and happy despite the complications in their family situation, James felt his heart both break and heal simultaneously. "Daddy, I was hoping you would call," Emma said, her enthusiasm cutting through his emotional fog. They talked for an hour about her school, her friends, and her upcoming school play where she would be performing as a tree. James found himself truly listening, not just waiting for his turn to speak or defend his position, but actually hearing his daughter's words and feelings. When Emma asked about his work, James found himself telling her about Prince George's visit that day. He described the young prince's kindness and maturity, careful not to reveal any confidential details about royal family activities, but sharing the emotional impact of the encounter. Emma was fascinated by the story and proud that her father had been chosen for such recognition. "Maybe Prince George knows that you're a really good daddy, even when you're sad," Emma said with the straightforward wisdom that children often possess. Her words hit James with unexpected force, reminding him that his current struggles didn't erase his fundamental worth as a father or as a person. After they ended the call, James made a decision that had been building throughout the day. He pulled out a piece of paper and began writing a letter to Sarah, not to beg for reconciliation or to argue about their problems, but to acknowledge his mistakes and to express his commitment to becoming a better father to Emma. The letter was honest about his failures, while also asserting his determination to rebuild his relationship with their daughter. He also wrote a letter to his commanding officer, requesting a meeting to discuss his career goals and his desire to take on additional responsibilities that might lead to advancement. For too long, James had allowed his personal struggles to convince him that he was failing professionally as well, but Prince George's recognition reminded him that his service had value and meaning. As he prepared for sleep that night, James placed Prince George's card on his bedside table where he could see it first thing in the morning. The simple drawing of a soldier standing proud had become a mirror in which James could finally see himself clearly again. The next few weeks brought subtle but meaningful changes to James's daily routine. Each morning he would glance at Prince George's card before leaving his flat, using it as a reminder that his service mattered and that he had the strength to face whatever challenges the day might bring. The card had become more than a memento. It was a symbol of hope and renewed purpose. His meeting with his commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, had gone better than expected. Rather than viewing James's request for additional responsibilities as presumptuous, Harrison had been impressed by his renewed motivation and obvious commitment to excellence. James learned that he had been considered for several advancement opportunities over the years, but had been passed over because his supervisors sensed his distraction and lack of engagement. "We've noticed a change in you recently, Mitchell," Harrison had said during their conversation. "Your attention to detail has always been exemplary, but there's something different about your presence now. You seem more focused, more purposeful." James had been assigned to a special ceremonial unit responsible for training new guards and overseeing high-profile events. The additional responsibilities came with increased pay and more flexible scheduling, which would allow him to spend more time with Emma when she visited. The promotion also meant that James would occasionally interact with members of the royal family during formal functions, though always maintaining the proper professional distance. His relationship with Emma was slowly healing through regular phone calls and planned visits. Sarah had agreed to allow Emma to spend alternate weekends with James, and their first official custody visit was scheduled for the following weekend. James had spent days preparing his flat, buying groceries for Emma's favorite meals and setting up a small area where she could do homework and play. During their phone conversations, Emma had become fascinated by the story of Prince George's kindness. She had drawn her own picture for James, a colorful drawing of a castle with soldiers standing guard and a rainbow overhead. "This is for when you feel sad again," she had explained matter-of-factly. "Rainbows come after storms, just like in science class." James had framed Emma's drawing and placed it next to Prince George's card, creating a small shrine of encouragement on his kitchen counter. The visual reminder of these two acts of kindness, one from future royalty and one from his own daughter, served as daily motivation to continue rebuilding his life. The changes weren't just professional and personal, they were internal as well. James found himself more aware of the people around him, more attuned to moments when others might need encouragement or recognition. During training sessions with new guards, he made an effort to acknowledge their progress and offer guidance without the harsh criticism that had once characterized military instruction. One afternoon, while supervising drill practice, James noticed a young recruit struggling with the physical demands of maintaining perfect posture for extended periods. Instead of shouting corrections, James quietly approached the young man during a break and shared techniques he had developed over the years for managing fatigue and muscle strain. "The important thing to remember," James told the recruit, "is that this uniform represents service to something greater than ourselves. When you focus on that purpose instead of just the discomfort, everything else becomes more manageable." The recruit, barely 20 years old and clearly homesick, nodded gratefully. Later, James learned that the young man had been considering leaving the guard due to the physical and emotional challenges of the training. James's encouragement had helped him find the motivation to continue. Word of James's transformed leadership style reached his superiors, who began considering him for even greater responsibilities. There was talk of an assignment that would involve working directly with palace security during major state events, a position that would represent the pinnacle of his career in royal service. As James walked through the castle grounds one evening after a particularly successful training session, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that moment when Prince George had silently acknowledged his pain and offered recognition of his service. The young prince probably had no idea of the ripple effects his simple gesture had created, but James was determined to ensure that the kindness would continue to spread outward, touching other lives in need of hope and encouragement. Emma's first weekend visit exceeded all of James's hopes and expectations. She arrived at his flat on Friday evening carrying a small overnight bag and wearing the biggest smile he had seen from her in months. The tension that had characterized their recent interactions seemed to have melted away, replaced by the easy affection that had always defined their father-daughter relationship. They spent Saturday morning exploring London together, visiting the Tower Bridge and walking along the Thames. Emma peppered James with questions about his work, eager to hear more stories about castle life and the other guards. She was particularly interested in hearing whether he had seen Prince George again, though James explained that their duties rarely brought them into contact with the royal family. "But he knows you're special now," Emma said with absolute certainty. "That's why he gave you the card. Kids can tell about grown-ups, you know. We have special powers for seeing when people are good inside even when they're sad." Her innocent wisdom struck James profoundly. Children did seem to possess an uncanny ability to see through adult facades and connect with authentic emotion. Prince George had certainly demonstrated that quality during their brief encounter, recognizing James's pain despite his disciplined exterior. Sunday morning brought unexpected excitement when James received a call from Lieutenant Colonel Harrison. There had been a last-minute scheduling change for a state garden party, and James was needed to fill in for a senior guard who had fallen ill. The event would involve close proximity to the royal family, and Harrison specifically requested James because of his recent exemplary performance and reliability. Emma was thrilled by the development, especially when James arranged for her to visit the castle grounds during a public tour that afternoon. While he couldn't interact with her during his duties, she would be able to see him in his official capacity, standing guard during one of the most prestigious events of the year. The garden party was a grand affair, with hundreds of guests including diplomats, military leaders, and prominent citizens who had been honored for their service to the community. James took his position near the main pavilion, where he would have a clear view of the proceedings while maintaining security for the royal family. As the afternoon progressed, James spotted Emma in the crowd of public visitors, her face glowing with pride as she pointed him out to other children in their tour group. He maintained his professional composure, but internally he felt a warmth that had been absent from his life for far too long. Having his daughter witness him at his best, serving with honor and dignity, meant more to him than any medal or commendation could. The moment that would define the entire day came when the royal family made their entrance. Prince William and Catherine appeared first, followed by their children, including Prince George. The young prince looked older than James remembered, more confident and poised as he accompanied his parents through the formal presentations and conversations with guests. As the royal family moved through the crowd, Prince George's path brought him near James's position. For a brief instant, their eyes met across the distance, and James saw a flicker of recognition in the boy's expression. Prince George's face brightened with what appeared to be genuine pleasure at seeing the guard again, though he maintained the proper royal demeanor throughout the interaction. The silent acknowledgement lasted only a moment, but it was observed by several people nearby, including Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, who later approached James with curiosity about the young prince's obvious recognition. James simply explained that he had been on duty during previous royal activities, not mentioning the personal significance of their connection. When Emma's tour group was led past James's position later in the afternoon, she waved discreetly, her eyes shining with admiration for her father's important role in such a significant event. Other children in the group began asking questions about the guards, and their tour guide explained the history and importance of the Royal Protection Service. As the day concluded and James prepared to leave his post, he reflected on how perfectly the weekend had unfolded. Emma had seen him at his professional best. He had successfully completed a high-profile assignment, and he had shared another meaningful moment with the young prince whose kindness had started his journey toward healing. The pieces of his life were slowly coming back together, stronger and more purposeful than before. 3 months after the garden party, James received news that would reshape his career entirely. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison called him into his office with an expression that mixed excitement with solemnity, indicating that something significant was about to unfold. James had learned to read these subtle cues during his years of military service, and he sensed that his life was about to change once again. "Mitchell, you've been selected for a very special assignment," Harrison began, gesturing for James to take a seat. "The Palace Security Division has recommended you for a position in the royal family's personal protection unit. This would involve direct responsibility for the safety of the young princes during public appearances and private events." The magnitude of the opportunity was staggering. The personal protection unit represented the elite of royal security, composed of guards who had demonstrated exceptional skill, judgment, and discretion. Members of this unit often developed long-term relationships with the royal family members they protected, becoming trusted figures in their lives while maintaining absolute professional boundaries. James felt a mixture of honor and nervous anticipation. The position would require extensive additional training, background investigations, and psychological evaluations to ensure his suitability for such intimate access to the royal family. The salary increase would be substantial, finally allowing him to provide better financial support for Emma and potentially move to a larger flat where she could have her own room during visits. "There's something else," Harrison continued, his expression shifting to one of curiosity. "The recommendation for your selection came directly from an unusual source. Prince William personally requested that you be considered for this position after observing your conduct during several recent events. He mentioned your exceptional professionalism and what he described as your natural rapport with young people." James wondered if Prince George had somehow communicated his positive impression of the guard to his father. Though such conversations would typically remain private within the royal family, regardless of how the recommendation had originated, James was determined to prove worthy of the trust being placed in him. The training period lasted 6 weeks and covered everything from advanced security protocols to child psychology and emergency medical procedures. James excelled in every area, his motivation fueled by the knowledge that he would soon be responsible for protecting the children who represented the future of the monarchy. His fellow trainees noticed his exceptional dedication and focus, often seeking his guidance on complex scenarios and procedures. During the final week of training, James participated in a practice exercise involving a simulated public appearance by the royal children. He was assigned to shadow Prince George during a mock school visit, maintaining appropriate distance while ensuring the young prince's safety and comfort. The exercise went flawlessly, with James demonstrating the perfect balance of vigilance and discretion that the position required. His first official assignment came during a charity event where Prince George was scheduled to present awards to young volunteers. As James took his position near the stage, he caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd, Emma, who had been selected by her school to receive recognition for her work, organizing supply drives for local animal shelters. Sarah had called him the night before to share the exciting news, and they had worked together to ensure Emma would be dressed appropriately for such a prestigious occasion. The moment when Prince George handed Emma her award was captured by official photographers, but James experienced it from a unique perspective. He watched as his daughter curtsied politely and accepted her certificate with grace and confidence, her pride evident in every gesture. Prince George engaged her in brief conversation, asking about her volunteer work with the genuine interest that had become his trademark. As Emma turned to leave the stage, her eyes found James in his position near the security perimeter. Her smile of recognition and pride was radiant, conveying more love and admiration than words could express. In that instant, James realized that his journey from despair to renewal had reached a perfect culmination. He was serving his country in the highest capacity possible while being present for one of the most important moments in his daughter's young life. The parallel between Prince George's original act of kindness and this moment of professional triumph was not lost on James. The young prince who had recognized his humanity during his darkest hour was now, indirectly, providing him with the opportunity to rebuild his relationship with his own child while serving the crown with honor and distinction. 2 years had passed since that transformative morning when Prince George's wordless act of kindness had changed the trajectory of James's life. Now serving as a senior member of the royal family's personal protection unit, James had become a trusted and respected figure within the palace community. His expertise and calm demeanor during high-stress situations had earned him the confidence of his superiors and the royal family alike. Emma, now 12 years old, had grown into a confident and compassionate young woman who split her time between her mother's home and increasingly frequent visits with James. The custody arrangement had evolved naturally as Emma expressed her desire to spend more time with her father, and Sarah had graciously supported this development. The bitter tensions that had once characterized their divorce had gradually transformed into a respectful co-parenting relationship focused on Emma's well-being. James's new flat, spacious enough to provide Emma with her own beautifully decorated room, had become a warm and welcoming home. The walls displayed Emma's artwork alongside James's military commendations and photographs from various royal events. Prince George's original card, now carefully preserved in a frame, held the place of honor on James's desk, serving as a daily reminder of how a moment of genuine human connection could transform a life. The relationship between James and Prince George had evolved into something unique within the formal structure of royal protocol. While they maintained appropriate professional boundaries, there was an underlying foundation of mutual respect and understanding that went beyond typical guard royal dynamics. Prince George, now 12 himself, often sought James's presence during challenging public appearances, finding comfort in the steady reliability that had first drawn him to offer kindness to the struggling guard. During a recent school visit in Scotland, Prince George had been nervous about delivering his first major public speech to a large assembly of students. As they prepared backstage, the young prince had quietly expressed his anxiety to James, who had offered gentle encouragement based on his own experiences with performance pressure in military ceremonies. "Remember what you told me in your card?" James had said softly, referring to the message of service and purpose. "You're here to make these students feel valued and inspired. Focus on them instead of your nerves, and everything else will fall into place." Prince George had nodded gratefully, and his speech had been delivered with confidence and warmth that earned enthusiastic applause from the young audience. Afterward, he had given James a small nod of acknowledgement, the same gesture of respect that had characterized their first meaningful interaction. Emma had recently been accepted into a prestigious scholarship program that would allow her to pursue advanced studies in environmental science, her chosen field of passion. Her acceptance essay had included references to the importance of service and kindness, values she had learned from observing both her father's dedication to duty and the examples of compassion she had witnessed during various royal events she had attended as James's guest. "Daddy always taught me that how we treat people when no one is watching shows who we really are," Emma had written. "And I learned from meeting Prince George that kindness doesn't require grand gestures. Sometimes the smallest acts of caring can change someone's entire world." As James reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point in his life, he marveled at the unpredictable ways that human connections could reshape destinies. A young prince's moment of empathy had not only saved him from despair, but had launched him toward a career pinnacle he had never imagined possible. More importantly, it had taught him that vulnerability could be a source of strength rather than weakness, and that recognizing others' pain was often the first step toward healing. The original card from Prince George remained on James's desk, its simple message unchanged, but its meaning continuously deepening. "Thank you for keeping us safe" had become more than appreciation for physical protection. It represented the safety that comes from knowing that kindness exists in the world, that people can change and grow, and that even in the darkest moments, hope can arrive in the most unexpected forms. James's story had become legendary within the Guard, though he rarely spoke about it directly. Young recruits would hear whispered accounts of the sergeant, whose life had been transformed by royal recognition, and many found inspiration in the idea that their service mattered not just in grand historical terms, but in deeply personal human ways. Prince George, now poised and confident as he approached his teenage years, continued to demonstrate the empathy and awareness that had characterized his childhood gesture. Palace staff often remarked on his unusual ability to notice when people around him were struggling, and his natural inclination to offer support in whatever way protocol allowed. The ripple effects of that single moment of wordless kindness continued to spread outward, touching lives in ways both seen and unseen, proving that the most powerful acts of compassion often require no words at all, only the courage to see another person's pain and respond with genuine human connection.